Here is part 1, written exactly in the cinematic, emotional, HFY style you requested, with no headings, no subheadings, no labels of any kind. A lonely distress beacon drifted through the void, pulsing its fading cry into an ocean of uncaring darkness. It had once belonged to a proud starbound vessel, jewel of a peaceful civilization, now reduced to shattered metal drifting between the stars. Its crew, those who survived the breach, the fire, and the cold, waited in silence, suspended between hope and surrender. No allied ships answered. No familiar signatures appeared. Their coalition had abandoned this sector long ago, leaving the wounded ship to a slow, inevitable death. Captain Rythus stared through the cracked viewport, watching the distant stars blur behind webs of gold-tinted frost. His breath was shallow, whispering white trails in the thinning air. Every hour the life support struggled harder. Every hour the lights flickered longer. Every hour the beacon grew weaker. There came a moment, a stillness that tasted like the end, where even the hum of the failing engines fell silent. The crew exchanged quiet glances, not of fear, but of acceptance. No one in this galaxy would come for them. Not anymore. Then, in that graveyard silence, the sensors stirred. A single indicator blinked. Once. Twice. Weak, uncertain. But growing. Something moved in the dark. Not a coalition ship, not an enemy raider, nothing recognizable from their star charts. A new signature, dense, powerful, burning hotter than any vessel they knew. The drifting crew leaned closer, watching the anomaly crawl across the radar, its engine wake cutting through the void like a blade of living light. The beacon's failing transmitter struggled to identify it. When it finally succeeded, a hush fell over the survivors. A name they had heard only in warnings, in legends whispered at training academies. A species known not for alliance, but for survival. Not for fragility, but for relentless defiance against every impossible frontier. It was a human ship. The vessel emerged from the darkness like a rising titan, angular. Armored, alive with heat signatures that lit the broken starbound hull in stark relief. Engines thrummed with a deep, primal energy. Its hull bore scars, scorch marks, melted plating, the aftermath of battles the crew could hardly imagine. This was no patrol craft. No diplomat's escort. This was a ship built to go where no sane species ventured, to survive what others fled, to challenge the void itself. Captain Rythus felt something stir inside him. Not hope, not yet, but something warm enough to thaw the frost on his skin. For the first time in a long while, the silence wasn't crushing, it was listening, and then the human ship slowed, thrusters firing with deliberate control. It held position beside the dying vessel, casting long shadows over the wreckage as though shielding it from the void. Light swept across the hull, scanning, searching, recognizing the life still clinging to its skeletal frame. The crew exchanged stunned looks. No coalition ship had ever come this close after a distress signal. No allied captain had ever braved this sector since the war began. But here was a human vessel, arriving alone, answering a call that wasn't meant for them. A call, by all logic, they should never have heard, yet somehow, impossibly, they had. As the last reserves of the starbound ship flickered and the darkness closed in once more, a final thought rippled through Rythus's mind, quiet. Trembling and disbelieving, why would humans come here? Here is part 2, fully cinematic, emotional, smooth for narration, and continuing seamlessly from part 1 with no labels or headings. For a long, breathless moment, the human ship did nothing. It simply hovered there, massive and silent against the star-flecked darkness, as if listening to the rhythm of the dying vessel beside it. The crew watched with a mixture of awe and disbelief, feeling the weight of that presence settle over them like a protective cloak. Humanity was young compared to the ancient civilizations of the galaxy, yet their ships carried an unmistakable aura, part myth, part menace, part miracle. Something in their design spoke not of fear, but of a species that stared into the cosmic abyss and refused to blink. A low vibration trembled through the shattered starbound hull. Not from within, but from the human vessel as a faint blue glow spread along its underside. It was scanning them, carefully, methodically, as though handling something fragile. No weapons hummed to life, no threats were issued. Only a pulse of energy, warm and steady, washing over the drifting craft like a gentle tide. The crew felt it, not physically, but instinctively. Their failing systems responded, flickering with new strength as if encouraged by the proximity of a far more powerful counterpart. Emergency lights steadied. Air pumps whirred back to life. Even the cracked viewport cleared slightly as the ship's automated repairs struggled for one last effort. The humans were stabilizing them. Rythus pressed a trembling hand against the console, barely daring to believe it. No other species would dare get this close to a destabilized hull. It was too risky. Too unpredictable. Too unprofitable. But humans had a strange relationship with risk, treating it less like an enemy and more like a familiar companion. A sudden burst of movement caught his eye. The human ship was rotating, aligning its dorsal structure with the starbound craft. And then something unfolded from its underside, a segmented arm of reinforced alloy. Extending like a mechanical lifeline. It locked into position with a resonant metallic hiss, bridging the dead space between the two vessels. The crew stared in shock. A docking linkage? No one docked with stranded wrecks. Not in this sector. Not this deep into the abandoned fringe, yet the humans did. With a slow, deliberate precision, clamps secured themselves to the starbound hull. The contact shuddered through the crippled vessel, and for a moment everyone feared the structure would collapse. But the humans held firm, adjusting, compensating, supporting the broken ship with a strength that felt almost parental. A glow of energy surged through the linkage, steady, warm, powerful. Life support indicators began to climb. Structural integrity stabilized. Oxygen levels rose. The dying ship exhaled a breath it didn't know it could still take. Relief washed through the survivors, fragile and overwhelming, but beneath the relief came something else. A creeping, bewildered curiosity. Why would humanity, infamous for their isolationism, for their territorial brutality, for their refusal to bend to any council or empire, come this far to save a species that had never once spoken to them? Rythus looked toward the viewport again, watching the human ship loom like a guardian forged from starlight and war. Its hull bore names etched into the metal, human tradition, names of lost ships. Fallen fleets, remembered battles. Every scar was a story. Every mark a testament, and yet here they were, answering a distress signal that was never meant for their ears. The starbound crew exchanged glances loaded with unspoken questions. The humans had not hailed them. Had not demanded explanations. Had not approached with arrogance or condition. They acted as if helping was simply instinct. Rythus found himself whispering the first words spoken on the bridge in hours, soft and shaking with wonder. Perhaps legends are misunderstood. Beyond the hull, the human vessel brightened its external lights, painting the wreckage with a soft amber glow. The message was unmistakable. Clear. Silent, you are not alone out here, and for the first time since the disaster, the survivors believed it. Here is part 3, longer, deeper, cinematic, emotional, and flowing seamlessly with no headings, no labels, no commentary. The starbound crew stood in hushed silence as the human vessel completed the stabilization routine, its lights dimming to a calmer pulse as if signaling, "You're safe for now." No voice reached them across the void. No human face appeared on their cracked displays. And yet the presence of the ship felt profoundly attentive, like a giant kneeling to inspect an injured creature too fragile to move. Then, without warning, the human hull began to shift. Panels separated and folded into one another, revealing layered mechanisms beneath the surface. A section at the bow reconfigured, its plating sliding apart like petals opening in slow, deliberate motion. Within the expanding structure, a shuttle waited, sleek, angular, and etched with markings that glowed faintly white. It disengaged from its cradle and drifted forward, thrusters barely whispering as it approached the starbound's docking hatch. Nerves cracked through the crew, humans were unpredictable. They were brilliant and terrifying in equal measure, engineers who built machines that disobeyed the known rules of physics, warriors who refused to surrender even when hopelessly outmatched. Explorers who looked at cosmic horrors and said, "Let's get closer." No one knew what a human boarding team might do, or whether their presence meant salvation. Or something else entirely. The shuttle stopped just meters from the damaged hatch and extended a flexible tube that sealed itself tightly along the edges. A gentle vibration traveled through the starbound hull as the airlock synchronized. Their systems, weak and bleeding power, somehow still responded to the handshake protocol as if compelled to obey. A hiss echoed through the corridor, the hatch slid open, cold air washed through the hallway, clean, dense, sharp with unfamiliar sterilizing agents. Rythus felt his heart pound as the silhouette of a human appeared in the threshold, outlined by the bright light behind them. Their suit was heavy, armored along the chest and limbs, but crafted with the unmistakable precision of human engineering, brutal form, elegant function. The helmet was opaque, reflecting the flicker of damaged lights like a dark, unblinking eye. The human stepped inside, every motion was precise. Controlled. Purposeful, not a soldier entering enemy territory, a rescuer entering a disaster zone. They paused just long enough to scan the survivors. The device on their wrist projected holographic readouts that shifted to a deep warning red the moment it detected low oxygen levels. The human tilted their head, acknowledging the severity, then lifted an arm and tapped a command into the device. Portable emitters on their suit released a burst of ionized gas that diffused through the corridor. In seconds, the air regained breathable density. The survivors felt it instantly, lungs filling deeper, chest aching with the sudden gift of oxygen. The human spoke, their voice was distorted through the helmet, calm and steady. They didn't ask for gratitude. They didn't demand explanation. They simply delivered a short, quiet message in the interspecies common tongue, an accent unmistakably human: "You'll live." The simplicity of those words struck harder than any grand declaration. No theatrics. No ceremony. Just a statement of fact from a species that refused to let others die on their watch. The human raised a hand and motioned toward the shuttle. Not a command. An invitation. Rythus hesitated, torn between fear of the unknown and awe of the impossible. But the human waited patiently, their posture grounded and unthreatening despite their sheer physical presence. They radiated a confidence that felt almost alien in itself, a confidence forged from countless battles survived and catastrophes endured. The crew exchanged glances and slowly moved toward the boarding tube. As they approached, they noticed something strange. The human didn't step back. Instead, they stood still, bracing subtly at the joints of their armor, supporting the weakened wall of the corridor with their own strength so the survivors could pass safely beneath it. Not even machines built for rescue did that, only a species that had learned, painfully and repeatedly, what it meant to lose people would think of such a thing. The crew entered the shuttle one by one, trembling, exhausted, barely holding on to consciousness. Rythus was the last to step through. He glanced back at the armored figure still reinforcing the structure. The human met his gaze through the reflective helmet. Not a word passed between them, only a quiet understanding. They had come not as conquerors. Not as opportunists. Not as legends descending from the stars. They came because someone was dying, and humans didn't ignore calls for help. The shuttle doors sealed. The interior lights warmed. The engines hummed softly. As the craft detached and glided back toward the massive vessel waiting in the starlight, Rythus felt a strange, overwhelming surge building in his chest. Not fear, not confusion, but something deeper, almost reverent. Hope, the kind found only in the presence of beings who refuse to look away from the suffering of others. Outside, the human ship watched over them like a silent giant, its hull shimmering with the faint glow of concealed power, a myth brought to life, a predator. A protector. And now, their only chance at understanding why humanity had come at all. Here is part 4, longer, deeper, cinematic, atmospheric. And seamlessly continuing your story with no headings, no labels, no commentary, the human shuttle glided into the vast hangar of the colossal vessel with the smooth grace of a leaf settling onto calm water. The interior was dim, lit by long beams of soft white that traced the walkway lines below. The scale was staggering, enough room for hundreds of shuttles, yet only a few occupied their berths. Each one bore scars of distant battles, impacts sealed by dark alloy, scorch marks stained across their armored hides like metals earned through violence and fire. As the starbound survivors disembarked, the air inside the hangar hit them with a shock, warmer, richer, carrying a faint metallic scent that felt undeniably human. Every step echoed, swallowed by the enormity of the chamber. Above them, cranes and mechanical arms moved with silent precision, adjusting equipment, repairing hulls, or arranging supplies with the discipline of a species that refused chaos even in the aftermath of catastrophe. The armored human who had escorted them entered last. As their boots struck the floor, the hangar systems responded instantly. A scanning lattice ignited overhead, sweeping a shimmering wave across the survivors and mapping each life sign. It paused on the human for less than a second, recognizing authority, and vanished with a soft chime. Rythis felt an involuntary shiver. This wasn't a rescue ship. This was something far more formidable. The human gestured for them to follow. They moved through a corridor so wide it resembled a transit tunnel, its walls shifting with faint holographic overlays, maps, tactical updates, damage assessments, environmental readings. The data flickered in languages unfamiliar to them, yet every line radiated urgency and precision. They passed humans in lighter uniforms, each moving quickly but not in panic, only with purpose. Engineers scanning conduits. Medics carrying portable kits. Operators monitoring fluid displays that bent into complex geometric shapes. Not one of them paused to stare, not one seemed surprised by the presence of alien survivors. It took Rythis several moments to understand. This crew was used to disaster. Used to danger. Used to answering cries for help across hostile stars, used to saving people they'd never met. The escorting human led them into a smaller chamber, its door folding open with a ripple of hexagonal patterns. Inside, medical pods waited, sleek, white, and humming gently with soft diagnostics. Without a word, the human tapped a sequence into their wrist device. The pods opened, the survivors exchanged uncertain glances. These machines were nothing like their own. No exposed wiring. No blinking panels. Just smooth, seamless surfaces that glowed from within, as if lit by trapped starlight. Rythis hesitated, but exhaustion finally overpowered caution. He stepped inside one pod, and the moment he lay back, the interior shifted. The surface molded to his shape, scanning wounds, fractures, vital signs. Warmth spread through his limbs. Pain ebbed away. His lungs expanded fully for the first time since the starbound's hull ruptured. For a moment, he felt weightless, safe. Before the lid closed, he caught a final glimpse of the human watching over them, helmet still reflective, posture steady, like a silent guardian carved from raw determination. Then darkness fell. In that darkness, his mind drifted through scattered memories, the screaming alarms, the ship breaking apart, the crushing cold of the void. But threaded through those horrors now was something else, the shimmering silhouette of the human ship slicing through the silent emptiness like a blade of light. When the pod finally opened, time had blurred. The pain was gone. His body felt lighter. Stronger. He sat up to find the escort still there, waiting, arms crossed loosely, helmet now tucked under one arm. It was the first time Rythis saw the human face, sharp eyes. Tired but alert. A small scar along the brow. No menace. No arrogance. Just a steady, grounded presence that seemed to anchor the entire room. The human nodded once, a gesture of reassurance, nothing more, and motioned for the group to follow again. They were escorted deeper into the ship. The corridors grew darker, lined with reinforced plating and sealed hatches marked with warning sigils. Rythis sensed a shift in atmosphere. The hum of engines felt deeper, more resonant. This wasn't the medical wing. This was something closer to the ship's heart. Then they reached a viewing chamber. The door slid open to reveal a vast, curved window stretching across the entire wall. Starlight spilled into the room, bathing it in soft blue and silver. Beyond the glass lay a panorama of the silent void. And in the center, drifting like a wounded beast, was the remnants of the Starbound. Its hull was cracked, skeletal, glowing faintly where debris still floated. Rythus felt his breath catch, but it wasn't the Starbound that stole the scene, it was the human vessel. From here, its true structure was visible, layered rings rotating around a central core. Luminescent channels carrying pale energy along its length, the hull shifting subtly with internal mechanisms. It looked less like a spacecraft and more like a fortress born from the bones of ancient stars, its presence imposing and strangely graceful. The human beside them finally spoke, their voice quiet. "You weren't attacked by an accident." Rythus felt the room tighten around him. "There's a predator in this region," the human continued. "Unknown. Powerful. And hunting anything that transmits distress." A cold realization settled over the survivors. The Starbound hadn't been destroyed by misfortune. Something had come for them. The human turned slightly, eyes sharp with a gravity that made the air seem heavier. "And it's coming back." The room fell silent. The void outside seemed to darken. Rythus stared at the stars, vast, cold, merciless, and knew in a single trembling heartbeat that the rescue was only the beginning. Far beyond the fractured remains of their ship, shadows shifted. Something moved. The human ship began to power up, and for the first time since the Starbound died, Rythus felt fear not of the void, but of whatever had driven humans to prepare for war with such terrifying calm. Humanity hadn't just come to save them, humanity had come because something out there was worth hunting, and it was getting closer. Here is part 5, longer, darker, more atmospheric than part 1. And flowing seamlessly from the previous part with no headings, no labels, no commentary, a tremor ran through the viewing chamber, subtle but unmistakable, like a distant heartbeat pulsing beneath metal skin. The lights shifted to a deep amber glow, and faint sirens resonated through the corridors, not loud, not panicked, but controlled, disciplined, as if the ship itself was exhaling and preparing its muscles for violence. The survivors exchanged frightened, silent glances. The human didn't flinch. Instead, they stepped forward, eyes fixed on the void beyond the fractured remains of the Starbound. Their expression was no longer just alert, it was calculating. Focused. Like they were mentally lining up pieces on a battlefield only they could fully see. A circular pattern of holographic symbols erupted around them, suspended in the air. Tactical readouts. Ship silhouettes. Threat levels. Spatial distortions. Rythus couldn't read human glyphs, but he understood one thing clearly: every symbol marked something dangerous. A deep, resonant hum began rolling through the hull, the kind you felt in your bones long before your ears interpreted it. Something massive, ancient, and powerful was waking up inside the ship. It didn't sound like engines, those were already active. This was something deeper. Something older, a system made not for travel, but for conflict. Outside the window, the darkness shifted. At first, it looked like a trick of the eyes. A star winking out. A shadow moving where shadows shouldn't exist. Then Rythus saw it clearly, a ripple, a distortion bending the starlight into a spiraling funnel, pulling at the edges of space as if the void itself were being wrung like cloth. The Starbound's debris drifted toward it. Then away. Then back again in a sickening, unpredictable rhythm, a gravitational lure, a trap. The human's jaw tightened. They tapped a sequence into their wrist device, and the ship responded instantly. Hulking armor plates slid into position outside the window, locking into place like the ribs of a titan preparing to stand. Beams of electric blue energy traced along the interlocking armor segments, sealing them with a hum that vibrated the air. Behind the armor, something else activated, massive, hidden cannons rising like awakening giants. Rythus stared with widening eyes. This wasn't just a warship. This was a weapon built from human fear, human rage, and human resolve, all forged into a vessel meant to outlast extinction. The distortion in space shuddered violently. Something began to push through, not a Ship, not a creature, something in between, a mass of chitin black plating glistening like wet obsidian, spiking outward in erratic formations. 6 limbs shaped like jagged blades unfurled from the distortion, each one stretching across kilometers. A split jaw opened across its body, revealing bioluminescent spirals of green and violet, pulsing like a heartbeat. The survivors recoiled. Even without understanding biology, they knew, this thing wasn't mechanical, it wasn't alive, it was both, some ancient predator that devoured signals, hunted distress, consumed the dying cries of ships and civilizations, a void feeder, a gravity leech, a star eater. Rythus felt his throat lock. The human didn't. Their stance remained firm, almost calm, as if they had trained for this moment. No, expected this moment. From the second they saw the shattered starbound drifting alone, the void feeder screeched, though no sound traveled through space. The vibrations rolled across the viewing chamber in a low, palpable tremor. The lights flickered. The holograms shivered. The human ship responded. Rings along its hull began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, each rotation generating concentric waves of shimmering energy that warped space itself. The glow intensified until it illuminated the starbound wreckage like a synthetic sunrise. Rythus gripped the railing. What are humans doing? He whispered under his breath. The human turned, hearing him despite the whisper, their voice low but steady, locking it in place. The rings hit critical velocity, space cracked, a lattice of glowing geometric lines burst outward, forming a cage of white-blue machinery that anchored itself to the surrounding vacuum. Every line hummed with power. Every angle aligned with impossible precision. It encased the void feeder like a net woven from collapsing stars. The creature thrashed, tearing at the spatial cage. The cage bent, it groaned, it held. The human drew in a slow breath, and for the first time, Rythus noticed something beyond their armor and calm, a flicker of fear, not for themselves, for what would happen when they unleashed the ship's full power, because the ship wasn't built to win, it was built to erase. The void feeder roared again, an implosion of twisting gravity. The human raised their wrist, and the cannons began to glow, each barrel lit with a roaring vortex of white gold light, spiraling, condensing, gathering the fury of physics itself. The rings slowed, locking the creature's prison into a stable singularity. Rythus felt every instinct in him scream to run. Even the survivors behind him backed away. This wasn't just a weapon, this was humanity's answer to predators. The human exhaled, the cannons fired, the universe went white, the viewing chamber darkened instantly to protect their eyes, but still the brilliance seared through, cutting across the void like an executioner's blade. The beam didn't strike the creature, it erased it, atoms shredded, the cage imploded. Space recoiled with a violent ripple, then settled, like a pond disturbed by a boulder. Silence fell, the void feeder was gone, completely, not debris, not fragments, gone. The human lowered their arms slowly, breathing out the tension of a fight they had clearly expected to be far worse. Rythus stared at them, at their calm, at the terrifying simplicity of how humanity fought back against cosmic predators. And he realized something that chilled him deeper than the void feeder ever could. Humans didn't defeat that thing because they were stronger, they defeated it because they had met worse, and survived. The last light of the dying transport flickered as if trying to hold on to existence. But the void swallowed it all the same. What remained was only silence, the heavy kind that feels like a verdict. And in that silence, the survivors drifted, weak, cold, waiting for the end they had already accepted. They had not spoken of hope for hours. Some no longer had the strength to speak at all. Their breaths were thin. Their bodies trembled. Their thoughts blurred. The universe felt impossibly large and painfully empty, then a faint tremor shivered through the hull. A ripple of motion. A vibration that did not belong to a corpse of a ship. At first they believed it was hallucination, the final kindness of a dying mind. But the tremor grew. A pulse. A hum. A sound that felt alive. Light seeped through the cracks in the blackout shutters, faint and white at first, then blinding and gold, washing over the survivors like sunrise breaking across a world long forgotten. The air felt warmer, the silence cracked, something enormous eclipsed the stars, and then they saw it, through fractured viewports, through ice-frosted glass, the silhouette of a vessel so massive it looked like a moving continent. Its hull glowed with swirling sigils, pulsing like a heartbeat. Armor plates shifted like interlocking tectonic plates. Trails of ionized light curled behind it like wings of fire. And at the center of its prow burned a single human insignia, a Terran ship, but not just any Terran ship. A war ark, the kind built when survival required madness, brilliance, and the willingness to carve a future out of the jaws of oblivion. The kind spoken about with equal parts fear and reverence. A vessel whispered to be able to cross entire sectors without slowing. A vessel rumored to ignore the laws of physics simply because humanity refused to bow to them. The survivors felt something jolt awake inside them, something fierce, something primal, something they thought had died. The ship's gravitational wake wrapped around the broken transport like a giant's hand, steadying it, stabilizing it, saving it. Static burst through dead comms systems, crackling like a storm struggling to form. Then a human voice, steady and warm, cut through every layer of silence. "We've got you." 3 words, 3 simple words that carried the weight of an entire species. A species that took the indifferent void and punched corridors through it. A species that saw the impossible and built engines big enough to step over it. A species that refused extinction every time the universe tried to enforce it. The war ark's hangar doors unfurled like the wings of a mechanical leviathan. Light poured out, not blinding, but inviting, like the first breath after drowning. Magnetic tethers latched onto the drifting transport, pulling it into the embrace of the colossal vessel. The survivors watched the impossible cradle them with gentleness. The same vessel capable of leveling moons and challenging empires. Inside the hangar, the lights were warm. Human engineers ran forward in exosuits designed for battle but used now for rescue. Med drones zipped through the air like mechanical doves. The survivors were lifted into waiting arms, wrapped in thermal blankets, given water, checked for injuries, spoken to softly. Some cried. Some laughed. Some simply stared in disbelief. They were alive. The void had let them go. As the transport settled and the hangar sealed, the war ark's engines roared to life. Space distorted outside. The stars stretched. The ship turned its colossal frame toward an unknown point in the cosmos. Ready to fight whatever threat had left those survivors to die, because now the humans knew, because now someone had hurt their own, and humanity never let such sins go unanswered. As the survivors drifted into exhausted sleep, one final thought echoed in their minds, carried by the thrum of engines older than their homeworld, newer than their hope.